Chapter 1. The War That Wasn't Ours. The war had outlived the reasons that birthed it. Across the inner bands of the Orion Spur, starfields that once carried the quiet commerce of 1,000 species now pulsed with searchlight beams, debris halos, and the cold geometry of siege formations. For a century, battle lines drifted like tectonic plates through the dark, slow, grinding, inevitable, until whole systems became nothing more than names spoken with caution. Shipping corridors were charted and recharted, not by navigators, but by casualty projections. The light of distant suns was interrupted by the brief, violent flares of weapons that did not simply kill, but edited matter out of existence. At first, the galaxy had watched with the detached patience reserved for disputes that always ended the same way. A treaty, a concession, a generation spent rebuilding. But this conflict did not burn itself out. It learned, it adapted, it fed on the pride of those who could not accept a border moving the wrong direction. They called it the Kethari Vorlax War, as if a name could make it comprehensible. The Kethari Dominion believed in structure above all else. Their philosophy was a clean, unyielding lattice, hierarchy, duty, symmetry. To them, a civilization was a mechanism, each citizen a component, each component replaceable, each sacrifice meaningful if it preserved function. Their fleets reflected that worldview, disciplined columns of void steel and gravitic anchors, advancing with slow certainty, turning starlight itself into a measured resource. Kethari ships did not rush. They arrived, they aligned, they exerted pressure until the enemy had no room left to exist. The Vorlax Hegemony rejected structure as weakness. They were not a nation in the Kethari sense. They were an accelerating consensus of growth. Their doctrine was adaptation through conflict, survival by transformation. Vorlax vessels were grown as much as built, living hulls layered over nervous systems of circuitry, weapons that responded like reflexes, formations that shifted as if the fleet shared a single predatory mind. Where the Kethari sought permanence, the Vorlax sought momentum. Where the Kethari held ground, the Vorlax consumed it. Neither philosophy could tolerate compromise. Each saw concession as decay. So the war widened. It began as a contest over a corridor of mineral-rich systems along the Oltan Reach. Within 20 cycles, the corridor became a graveyard. Within 40, nearby federations collapsed under refugee tides and broken trade. By 60, the war's logistics had outgrown diplomacy. Shipyards became targets, then planets, then suns. A system that resisted too long might be punished by sterilization. Its orbital lanes seeded with mines that would detonate for decades, its atmosphere turned opaque with ash, its oceans boiled into clouds that drifted into space like accusations. Civilian cost was measured in unfamiliar units now. Not cities lost, but biospheres. Not casualties, but extinctions avoided by evacuation, and those were fewer each year. The lucky were displaced into crowded habitats and temporary rings. The unlucky became statistics recorded on encrypted channels, numbers that rose with the same steady certainty as fleet tonnage. And still the Galactic Council convened. In chambers of polished stone and inertial silence, delegates argued about terminology, aggression, defense, proportional response. Votes were taken, censures issued, sanctions proposed against powers too large to fear them. The Council's proclamations traveled at light speed and arrived to find new battlefields already blooming. The war did not pause for language. What it did respect, what both empires avoided without admitting they feared it, was a region of space that sat like a blank scar on the maps. The Silent Expanse. No trade lanes crossed it. Survey missions skirted its edge and returned with thin reports full of missing data and quiet unease. Its star systems were unclaimed, not because they lacked value, but because no one could agree what the expanse was. A navigation dead zone, some said. A relic of ancient weapons. A territory watched by something that did not speak. The Council had no official policy about it. The Council rarely wrote policies about things it could not enforce. Yet in the war's 100th year, even as Vorlax spearheads probed for weak points and Kethari bulwarks tightened into crushing arcs, neither side pushed into the Silent Expanse. Their admirals marked it as an absence, an inconvenience, a line that did not matter, because acknowledging it as anything more would require admitting uncertainty. At the expanse's center burned a modest yellow star catalogued long before the war learned to devour constellations. Solution. Around its third planet, quiet and enduring, a species watched. Humanity had broadcast once, generations ago, small, clean signals that asked nothing and promised nothing. When the galaxy failed to answer, the signals stopped. Since then, no treaties bore their signature, no council delegate claimed their seat, no human ship sailed the border wars. Their system remained dim on long-range scans, disciplined in its silence, as if the absence itself were intentional. They were not part of the conflict. They did not protest it. They did not intervene. They observed at distance, through instruments no one could name with confidence, letting the galaxy burn without stepping into its heat. And in Cycle 113, a Vorlax weapons platform near the Ultan Reach recalculated a firing solution by a fraction of a fraction, an error so small it would have been ignored anywhere else, until the beam's projected line, for the first time in a century, brushed the edge of the Silent Expanse. Toward Sol. The war did not notice what it had reached for yet. Chapter 2. The Notice. The first sign was not an explosion. It was a tremor in the math. On the Vorlax weapons platform, ruin of third spine, deep inside a web of forward logistics nodes, targeting arrays finished their cycle and returned a firing solution that should have been unremarkable. A Kethari convoy lane, a predictable vector, a window measured in milliseconds. The Vorlax did not aim with patience. They aimed with inevitability, layering probability upon probability until the outcome became a kind of certainty. The platform's living hull tightened around its core as the weapon matured. Veins of bioconductive tissue flushed dark, then bright, as if blood itself were being taught to carry lightning. A cluster-mind officer, one of the hegemony's many distributed decision organs, absorbed the final telemetry and approved release without ceremony. The shot did what Vorlax shots always did. It reached. Not as a projectile, not as a beam that could be tracked in any simple way, but as a directed collapse of conditions, an engineered instability that rode the edge of physical law, seeking a place where reality could be made to fail for someone else. For a fraction of an instant, the corridor ahead of the target convoy folded. Space squeezed. The weapon's intended impact point shimmered with the faint suggestion of a boundary under stress. Then the boundary slid. Not far. Not enough to trigger alarms designed for large errors. Just enough. The collapse wave found a route that the Vorlax did not chart, because no one charted it. A shallow, treacherous gradient of gravity and interference that led away from the contested corridor, away from Kethari lanes, away from every map the war considered relevant. It bled outward toward the blank scar of the Silent Expanse. In the Kethari Dominion, observers registered the strike as an anomaly, an inconsistency in Vorlax patterning. Their analysts did not yet call it luck or mistake. The Kethari distrusted chance. Their doctrine insisted that every outcome was engineered by intention or incompetence, and incompetence could be exploited. So they leaned forward into their instruments and watched. In the Galactic Council's intelligence annex, buried beneath ceremonial chambers and diplomatic pageantry, a low-level sensor relay marked an impossible line, a weapons effect skimming the expanse's boundary. The relay requested verification. Verification came back delayed, incomplete, and threaded with gaps where data should have been. A junior archivist, a cautious being shaped by a species that survived through paranoia, flagged the record and elevated it one tier higher than protocol allowed. Above that tier, no one ignored it, because the expanse tolerated observation only until it didn't. And now something had touched it with violence. The collapse wave entered the Silent Expanse as a ripple enters deep water, visible for a moment, then swallowed by darkness. For several minutes, instruments across nearby sectors reported mild distortions, small, strange edits to background radiation, as if old starlight had been rearranged. Comms jittered and then stabilized. Navigation beacons blinked and returned to baseline. The war continued uninterrupted. Orders were issued. Fleets advanced. Another 1,000,000 lives were displaced somewhere along the reach. In Sol, the ripple crossed a line humanity had drawn for itself long ago, It grazed the outer lattice of detectors hidden in the void between planets. Silent, unlit structures anchored to nothing but precise geometry. It brushed the edge of a field that was not a weapon and not a shield, but a kind of measured refusal, a way of knowing what approached without announcing that anything waited. The first alarms did not ring on Earth. They did not need to. Across an orbital ring above the equator, an arc of platforms disguised as civilian infrastructure, systems that had been dormant for decades shifted into wakefulness. Power rerouted with the efficiency of a machine that had rehearsed the motion 1,000 times without ever performing it. Deep beneath the lunar regolith, arrays extended their attention outward, sampling the distortion's signature with clinical patience. On Mars, automated industrial networks suspended non-essential processes for 12 seconds, then resumed. It was not fear, it was prioritization. On Earth's surface, nothing changed at first. People went to work under stabilized skies. Oceanic cities glowed at dawn. Aircraft traced clean routes above cloud banks engineered to be predictable. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, an image so complete in its calm that it bordered on arrogance. Then, on every channel that mattered and several that did not, a message appeared. Not in any one language. In all of them, it did not arrive as a transmission that fought through encryption. It arrived as if it had always been waiting in the machinery of translation itself, an assumption embedded in the protocols of 1,000 species activated by a key no one admitted existed. In the Kethari Command Citadel, the message overlaid tactical hololiths without permission. In Vorlax hive nodes, it pulsed through sensory lattices like a cold spike. In the Galactic Council chamber, it replaced debate with silence. The words were spare, controlled, lacking ornament. To the civilizations conducting hostilities near our system, "You have fired upon a sovereign human world. This is your only notice." There was no emblem, no signature, no demand for tribute, no declaration of war. Just a boundary stated as fact. The Kethari reacted first, not with outrage, but with calculation. Their high strategist stared at the projection, mandibles set in a hard line, and asked the question that mattered. How did they route a message through secured Dominion channels without negotiation? It was not the threat that unsettled him. It was the implication of access. The Vorlax reacted with instinctive offense. They did not respect borders drawn by outsiders. Their distributed minds tasted the message like poison and pushed back against the idea that anything, anywhere, could tell them where they were allowed to hunt. The Council reacted with something closer to dread. Because the archives held older fragments, half-declassified incidents, ships that went missing at the Expanse's edge, telemetry that ended mid-phrase. Because the Council's quietist doctrine had always been avoidance, not understanding. Because the Council had built its authority on the assumption that every power could be balanced by another power. And the message that now hung above them did not ask to be balanced. It simply declared that it had been touched. Far from the Council, beyond the war's front lines, Sul continued to look calm on long-range scans, still quiet, still distant, still unresolved. No fleets poured from it, no weapons flared, no new signatures betrayed intent. Only that notice, and the fact that it had arrived at all. In Cycle 113, the war had not yet turned, but it had reached a place that did not belong to it, and something there had opened its eyes. Chapter 3. The Council Trembles. The war did not stop. That was the first and most dangerous assumption. In the hours following the notice from Sul, Vorlax strike groups continued their advance along the Ultan Reach. Kethari bulwarks shifted into counter-formation. Civilian evacuation convoys burned through restricted fuel reserves to outrun front lines that moved like grinding continental shelves. The war did not stop, but it hesitated. In the central chamber of the Galactic Council, hesitation was a physical presence. The chamber's vaulted ceiling reflected light from 100 species display fields, all now fixed on a single projection. The human message, preserved in perfect clarity. No one spoke at first. The council speaker, an elder of a species that had survived 2 extinction cycles by mastering caution, allowed the silence to stretch. She understood instinct. Instinct was speaking now in every delegation. A boundary had been crossed. And the entity that owned that boundary had responded without escalation. That was what unsettled them most. The Kethari delegate broke the silence. "The Dominion acknowledges the transmission," he said, voice precise, posture rigid. However, the weapon discharge in question was not directed at Saul. Any collateral interaction with the Expanse was incidental. Incidental, a word shaped to reduce gravity. Across the chamber, the Vorlax representative pulsed in agitation, its form shifting within a containment field of atmosphere and light. "The hegemony recognizes no territorial claim within the Silent Expanse," it transmitted. "No petition for recognition was submitted to this body. No seat was claimed." The implication was deliberate. If humanity did not participate in governance, it did not deserve deference. The speaker let them finish. Then she activated a secondary projection. Archived records, not public, not debated. Incidents. A Kethari reconnaissance cruiser that vanished at the Expanse's edge 70 cycles ago. A Vorlax exploratory broodship that ceased transmitting mid-analysis of Sol's outer asteroid clusters. Council probes that returned corrupted data, sections of telemetry overwritten with mathematically elegant noise. "Recognition," the speaker said evenly, "is not a prerequisite for capability." The chamber shifted. They had all known the archives existed. Few had examined them closely. Fewer still had connected the pattern. Humanity had never petitioned for a council seat. Humanity had never asked for protection. Humanity had simply remained. Watching, the Kethari delegate narrowed his gaze. "Speculation does not alter strategic necessity. The Dominion will not yield advantage based on a message lacking enforcement." A predictable stance. Order respected power, not warning. The Vorlax pulsed brighter. "Then let enforcement occur," it transmitted. "If Saul possesses strength, let it demonstrate it." The speaker studied both of them. They still believed this was a contest of equals. Outside the chamber, intelligence divisions across the Council's member states worked in silence. They re-examined every scrap of data ever collected on Saul. Solar output anomalies, too consistent to be natural. Orbital traffic patterns, too sparse for a civilization that had once broadcast curiosity. Energy signatures that suggested infrastructure, not weaponry, but infrastructure on a scale few empires could afford during wartime. And always the same conclusion. Incomplete. In the Kethari Dominion, High Strategist Varun issued a limited directive. Reroute active weapons platforms 5 degrees off trajectories intersecting the Expanse. Not retreat, not concession, merely adjustment. The order was framed as efficiency, it was caution. Within the Vorlax hegemony, the cluster mind that oversaw forward operations resisted similar recalibration. Aggression was growth, withdrawal was decay. The idea that a distant, silent species could dictate movement was an evolutionary insult. So the Vorlax did not withdraw, they recalculated. In Sol, the ripple's signature was still under analysis. Human systems did not rush to retaliation. They modeled. The collapse wave that had grazed the Expanse's boundary was dissected down to its foundational equations. Its origin point traced, its vector reconstructed. Intent was evaluated. Probability trees expanded across quantum-anchored processors buried beneath lunar crust and oceanic plates. The conclusion was precise. The strike had not targeted Earth, but it had not avoided it either. On Earth itself, no public panic spread. No visible mobilization unfolded. The orbital rings continued civilian traffic. Agricultural satellites adjusted climate modulation schedules. Interplanetary freight routes maintained timetable. Yet beneath the calm, dormant protocols shifted from observation to contingency. A line had been crossed, not in destruction, but in precedent. Back in council space, smaller powers began quietly altering policy. Trade convoys were rerouted farther from the Silent Expanse. Military exercises were postponed if they drifted too near its periphery. Insurance algorithms recalibrated risk models with a new variable, human response probability. The Council reconvened 20 standard hours after the notice. This time the debate was sharper. "What does Saul want?" a minor delegate demanded. The speaker answered without embellishment. "They have not said." That was the problem. No demand for reparations, no ultimatum beyond the warning, no fleet movements detected, just a statement of sovereignty, which implied patience. And patience in war was dangerous. In the Vorlax forward theater, Ruin of Third Spine completed another targeting cycle. The platform's living hull flexed as new solutions were fed into its core. One trajectory, minor efficient, intersected the same shallow gravitational gradient that had bent the previous collapse wave. This time, the deviation was smaller, almost negligible. In Sol's outer detection lattice, a new fluctuation registered. Not identical, but close enough. Deep beneath the surface of Luna, a long idle authorization tree illuminated its first branch in 2 centuries. No weapons fired, no ships launched, not yet. But across the void, between warring empires and a silent star, a calculation was being finalized, and this time it would not be a notice.